I had so many moments while researching this video where I would read about something and just like some minor plot point that would be kind of like a crazy plot point, and I would just be like, oh yes, yes, that happened. So the novel is full of memorable stuff. Will you actively remember? I understand that Gravity's Rainbow is a highly regarded postmodernist work. Did that make me enjoy it? No. Granted, I shouldn't have read it on the subway. A public place was not the appropriate place to read Gravity's Rainbow. There are a lot of detailed, grotesque scenes in this book. There's a bit where a woman shits in a dude's mouth. It's so detailed. It's so detailed. He chews. There's a bit where the guy who is arguably our protagonist crawls into a toilet where he's nearly assaulted by a fictional Malcolm X and his friends. Gravity's Rainbow is a massive novel. There are 400 or so characters, and there are roughly 8 to 10 of those characters that you've gotta like keep track of, log them in your mind if you want to remember anything that they've done in previous sections. I didn't keep track of the characters that diligently. I'd gotten the book as a gift and I just sort of started reading it. So for this reason, the journey was tough. It was a chaotic read, and I'd like to tell you why. Hi, I'm Nitwit. Welcome to Shitlit. Gravity's Rainbow was written by Thomas Pynchon, a descendant of the founder of Springfield, Massachusetts, actually. Pynchon was a Cornell brat who wrote technical manuals before the success of his first novel, V. Gravity's Rainbow, Pynchon's third book, is a postmodernist romp across Europe, or pseudo-Europe. Much of the story is given over to the exploits of an American lieutenant named Slothrop. It's found that Slothrop's sexual exploits align with the strikes of numerous V-2 rockets across London. This draws the attention of an agency called Pisces that conducts psychological warfare. Many recurring characters in the story are either tied to or orbit around the narrative loci of Pisces and Slothrop. But this book contains so much. Let's talk about what it's doing, if that makes sense. We're going to get into the style/genre shit today, folks. I realize that we don't get into this sort of thing with every book, but it is possible with every book I've done. So, first, what it means to be a postmodern work. We should talk about this because some things are called postmodern that aren't actually leaning in that direction. Postmodernism has been described as existing to critique the ideas within modernism, itself an amalgamation of artistic movements that took root and flourished between 1900 and the 1940s. Postmodernism's become more than that. It's grown to be conceived as a conflict of new and old modes, cultural and economic, and of the interests vested therein. Basically, postmodernism thinks about the consequences of the recent past. Gravity's Rainbow is a postmodern novel in that it contains commentary on the life and culture of the 1940s, and it meditates upon the global socio-political posture of the time. Many of its themes will remain notable throughout the decades preceding the time the story takes place. Namely, sex, drugs, and vagabond behavior. In style, Gravity's Rainbow challenges the reader with technical jargon intermixed with highly referential philosophical musings. Then, abruptly, he yanks the narrative to the pits of experience. Sections alternate between lofty conversations about conspiracies within the plot, the nature of being, and assorted grotesquerie. A horrid journey through a public toilet, or a violent episode on a private yacht, or Yeah, a dominatrix shitting into a man's mouth. The book is beautiful at times, but its beauty errs on the side of convolution, if that makes sense. Ideas within the story about breaking the cycle of nature are particularly rich when considered against the backdrop of a warring Europe, yes, but they're less rich when our protagonist sleeps with a 13-year-old who then dies, not because they slept together, for a different reason. The yacht plotline is bonkers. Pynchon is sometimes confused. If his characters are not full of sweetness and light, they do manifest a tendency to illustrate freak and hip culture philosophies of the 60s, according to which man is inherently good but for the corrupting power of the systems in whose power he is held prisoner. In this scheme, man is especially good when he is a noble savage, close to his natural roots. I went into this book without having read Gravity's Rainbow, and I came out being able to say I've read Gravity's Rainbow and not a ton else. Other people, however, have felt differently. Quite differently, in fact. So let's talk about the response to Gravity's Rainbow from when it was first published. Here we have yet another book that several critics wet their pants over. While some published more measured reviews that included the book's exhausting effects on the reader, others were unflinchingly glowing. Pynchon is willing and able to work from a range of perspectives infinitely wider, more difficult to manage, more learned than any to be found elsewhere in contemporary literature. His genius resides in his capacity to see feelingly, how these various perspectives are begotten of the same supportive structures that have foundations in the theology of the 17th century and science of the 19th. And here's a quote from one of the more measured reviews, and it's still a really good review. Hold on. His novel is a work of paranoid genius, a magnificent necropolis that will take its place amidst the grand detritus of our culture. Its teetering structure is greater than the many surrounding literary shacks and hovels. But we must look to other writers for food and warmth. Gravity's Rainbow is a book that commanded immediate literary respect from readers and reviewers alike. But what was so enthralling about it? To begin to answer this question, we'll look at some themes within the story. Sadomasochism is found all over Gravity's Rainbow. Oddly enough, minor characters encounter sadomasochistic scenarios / other characters with sadomasochistic leanings more often than our main players do. The presence of sadomasochism as a theme ties into larger questions regarding power, violence, and intimacy. For Pynchon, each of these things, power, violence, and intimacy, cannot exist or do not necessarily exist without being complicated by one of the others. And when sadomasochistic acts occur, the attention of the reader is placed more on the act itself more than the characters performing the acts, eschewing an inner look at a character's thoughts and feelings for the symbolic significance of the sadomasochistic act. Sadomasochism can be seen as a tool of both explicit and implicit manipulation. It may also be seen as a vehicle for liberation for the characters who leverage sadomasochism toward their own ends. For instance, Margareta and Bianca's performance aboard the ship Anubis. Either way, sadomasochism is used to evoke questions regarding power dynamics, vulnerability, and the impulses Pynchon intertwines with the human experience. Many characters suffer from paranoia throughout Gravity's Rainbow. The paranoia itself revolves around unfounded suspicions in varying environments, only some of which are overtly hostile. Paranoia isn't necessarily characteristic of a larger pathology for Pynchon, but a possible side effect of existing as a human. Perhaps as the product of exposure to specific suspicion-arousing events. Pynchon's paranoia has a universal element in the book, such that it's not the characters who are paranoid, but the world which fosters paranoia. Like other sorts of paranoia, it is nothing less than the onset, the leading edge, or the discovery that everything is connected, everything in the creation. Moreover, Slothrop's paranoia is justified in that his history of being monitored in psychological research provides a basis for his increasing detachment from reality and suspicions as the story progresses. Paranoia, in other words, is not something imagined or created by the mind in Gravity's Rainbow, but something that is perceived as the result of possessing a larger, perhaps sinister understanding of the world, its workings, and ostensible interconnectedness. Once the technical means of control have reached a certain size, a certain degree of being connected one to another, the chances for freedom are over for good. Historically, the V-2 rocket was the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile. They were supersonic, so they hit before there was any audible warning, and that was a frightening development. In Gravity's Rainbow, the V-2 rocket is synonymous with power. The party who possesses the capacity to fire the V-2 rocket, then, is the most powerful party in the story. In this way, the rocket surpasses political importance and takes on symbolic, near-religious connotations. The V-2 rocket and its capabilities cloud the minds of the story's characters, though it's almost never discussed explicitly. Rather, the characters talk around the V-2 rocket. The elephant in the room need not be mentioned mentality, and this is more than just the clandestine nature of the V-2 rocket project. A further mystical power is endowed to the V-2 rocket via the overlap of Slothrop's sexual endeavors and the map of V-2 missile strikes throughout London. While the person who possesses the power of the V-2 would be one of the most powerful people in the story, this person is not beyond the constraints of human desires, hopes, and vanity. Those controlling the V-2 rocket cannot possess the rocket power possesses them. Recommendation. Do I recommend Gravity's Rainbow? No. Not unless you're into really chaotic, confusing romps, which, you might be. But I would caution you against going through without a pen and paper on the side. Do yourself a favor and get the pen and paper, it'll help you keep track of things. This is another case where I'm going to recommend another work by the author instead of the book that we're discussing. The Crying of Lot 49 not only contains less disturbing / abruptly grotesque stuff, but it's a whole lot shorter than Gravity's Rainbow. I'd recommend going through The Crying of Lot 49 for a taste of Pynchon. I can promise you it'll still be artfully convoluted, as Pynchon tends to be. And you'll still get a lot of exposure to the author's meditations on paranoia. That's all for this round. I'm Nitwit, this is Shitlit, and I'll see you in a bit.